Um, it's a so I have a good news story to tell about retreading. In the U.S., we've had a very successful couple of years, specifically for retreading, and while we face challenges, a lot of those challenges are manageable. So I'm going to give a quick update on where we stand and where I think we're going in the U.S. So TRIB has been around for a long time. We were a nonprofit association founded in 1974, so this year is our 50th anniversary. Our mission is very simple one. We promote and defend the retread and repair industries. And we primarily do that through marketing and educational and outreach campaigns. Our members are retreaders, rubber manufacturers, suppliers to the retread industry, casing dealers, and about 75% of our membership is based in North America. The remaining 25% is spread all throughout the world. So a quick look at, retreading has a long history in the U.S. Originally started in 1912. It is actually the largest remanufacturing sector in the U.S., with about 51,000 employees currently employed in the industry. And with both direct and indirect jobs, we support over 268,000 employees. In the U.S., it delivers over $28 billion in economic value. And this is just a quick look at what the retreading market looks like in the U.S. As you can see, truck and bus heavily dominates the retreading sector. So we've got about 650 retread plants specifically focused on that market. We have 18 OTR retreading operations, 5 aircraft retreading plants, and then we still have a handful of passenger tire retreading that are focused on 4x4 off-road, taxis, any sort of high-use vehicle in a very particular size. I think one of the unique things about the U.S. market is that it is incredibly dominated by a handful of companies, and most of those companies have new tire operations. So you look at Bridgestone and Bandag, they represent about 45% of the market. Michelin and Oliver, which is their sub-brand, is about 24% of the market, and then Goodyear at 21%. The remaining, Vipal and Marangoni, which are recently formed a new partnership, and then Continental Tires, and that small sliver of 2% is the remaining independent retreaders based in the U.S. But you'll see most of those manufacturers, for instance, Bridgestone, they have a new tire operation, and they have a large retreading operation with Bandag. And there's a lot of technology exchange, sales exchanges that go along with those new tires and retread operations for each of those companies. If we look at the truck tire replacement market in the U.S., the green line is replacement new truck tires, and then the blue bars are retreading. And you can sort of see the up and down, especially in 2022, there were about 26 million new replacement truck tires sold in the U.S. and about 16 million retreaded truck tires. If you go back maybe 10, 15, 20 years, they almost used to be equal. So it was about 50-50 of new tires and retreaded tires. And that gap has started to widen at its widest point in 2022, where we had a 10 million delta between new and retreaded truck tires. But you can see retreading has been fairly consistent. We struggled in 2020 at about 14 million, and then we've had steady, slow growth. And I think we're looking at our forecast for next year is that we'll be pretty much flat with where we were in 2023 with 16 million truck tires sold in the retread industry. And I don't know how different this is in markets around the world, but our truck tire market is dominated by 5 sizes. And if you look at those 5 sizes, they make up about 74% of the market, which is a huge benefit to retreaders as well, because there's a ready supply of casings and there's a consistency in plant operations for them to be able to retread this relatively small group of sizes of truck tires. For the last couple of years, we have done a survey of our members all around the world. Obviously, it's heavily weighted to the U.S., and we've asked our members about, what are the challenges they face? What does their revenue look like? And at the beginning of 2023, we asked our members to forecast what their revenue was going to be like in 23. And then we looked again this year, and they were actually 100% spot on when they looked out and said, so about almost 60% of our members forecasted an increase in revenue for 2023, and that's almost exactly what they had. So we did have a handful of customers that had about a 12% of them had a decrease in revenue year over year, but you can see in 2023 it was a very positive year for retreading in the US. And we ask our members to rank what are the biggest challenges they face, and this is on a scale of 1 to 10. And the single biggest challenge that our members say is finding and keeping and training employees. And I'll talk about some of the things that we're trying to do as an organization to help them with those challenges. Number 2 for them is supply chain issues. So can they get materials? Can they get casings? What are the costs of those materials? And then one of the things that's moved up this year compared to last year's challenges is once again low-cost imported tires. So we have some protections in place. There's a couple of anti-dumping and countervailing duties on tires, truck tires imported from China. Right now, the US Trade Commission is looking at tires being imported from Thailand, and there may be some anti-dumping duties or tariffs put in place on those truck tires from Thailand as well. Some of the other things that our members mentioned, rising costs, regulatory and legislative issues that might come up both at the state and the federal level, finding casings, and then lastly, and this used to be one of the biggest issues that we faced, was really the misconceptions about retreading. It still exists, especially for those smaller fleets, but it has become less of a concern for the US retread industry than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So when we asked our members what 2024 was going to hold for them, there was little consensus amongst our members. The answers were really all over the place. So we had large retreaders that said we're expecting a 20% increase this year, and then other large retreaders said we're expecting a 20% decrease. So some of the factors that are driving the market in the US, the freight is really softening. So we see that in all of the early indicators of freight business in the US, we're starting to see them pull back. Supply chain issues are easing, and a lot of companies that use tires have stockpiled new tires. And so they have a whole group of new tires that they need to get through before they create casings and start retreading again. If anybody doesn't know, we have a pretty big election coming up in 2024 by a couple of really interesting and old candidates, but it creates a lot of uncertainty in the market. And anytime there's uncertainty, people tend to hold back on their investment. And we see that in the tire industry as well. And I mentioned the potential duties that we have on tires from Thailand. So the key factors influencing the retread industry in the US: prices. And Mike talked a little bit about it, the comparison between a new tire price and a retread tire price. Like, retreading has always sold its benefits on the cost savings that you get from that. Now, the environmental savings are in there too, but it's been an easier sell when you have a 50% or a 30% cost savings compared to retreading. And that's what we need to keep talking to potential customers about. I talked about supply chain issues, so whether the ports are freed up and if there's a free flow of imported tires into the US, that obviously has an influence on retreading in the US. People, so finding people to work in a plant. It's retreading in the US, even though the US is a huge country, it is incredibly geographically dispersed. So the retreaders are spread all throughout the US, and they're often in rural sort of underserved communities. But the retread plants are competing with Amazon and an Amazon warehouse for an employee. So you can get $20 an hour and work in a very warm retread plant doing what is physical labor, or you can get the same amount of money and work in an Amazon warehouse, filling boxes. And so that's sort of the competition that they face. One of the things that we've tried to do as an organization to help our members is we just relaunched our website in the US, and we've created a career section on the website. So one of the things, the next phase of this is education about what it looks like to work in the retread industry. But right now we're very focused on what are the open opportunities. So if you're recruiting in the retread industry, you can post a job for us, and it's a free service for our members. And so people can apply directly with your company to come into the industry. And we have some exciting things that we're working on that hopefully we can talk about later in the year, but to help bring more young talent into the retreading industry. There is a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on in the retread industry in the US. The big companies are getting bigger, and those smaller companies, those small independent operators are struggling to still meet customer needs when you're competing against a billion-dollar company that has great service operations, has nationwide coverage. And so those big companies continue to acquire smaller companies that help them on a geographical basis. And that's a very important part of what's driving issues in the US. I talked a little bit about Amazon warehouses. Well, they're also the key issue in the US and maybe other markets is last mile delivery. So this is a potential growth opportunity for the retread industry in the US. All of those Amazon vehicles that are delivering products in smaller sized tires that maybe haven't been retreaded in the past, the new tire companies are focused on this as a market for them, and the retread companies are also focused on a potential market as a growth area as well. I talked a little earlier about, there are still misconceptions that exist about retreading. I had a call from one of our members in Florida this morning, and he got a call from two of his customers, and their customers, their insurance company reached out to them and said, if you guys continue to use retreads on your trucks, your insurance rates will go up. Now, is there a single ounce of data to back that up? Absolutely not. And so we're going to work with him and with those insurance companies so that they understand that retreads are no less safe, as Mike talked about earlier, than new tires. But it still pops up from time to time in the US. Let me shift a little bit to talk about the cost benefits. And this is really where the sweet spot for retreading. So just in the US trucking fleets save over $1 billion every year by utilizing retreads in their operation. They cost 30 to 50% less than a comparable new truck tire. And quality new tires that have 2 retreads deliver 500% more mileage than a low-cost, one-and-done tire. And I think this is a key statistic, and we see this in the US. So almost 90% of the fleets that have 100 or more trucks in the US, they use retreads. And they do that because they've tested, they know it drives the lowest cost per ownership and the lowest cost per mile in the industry. And I'm going to give you a very specific example. So this is one of the large retreaders in the US and one of their large customers. And that customer came to them and said, look, we want to see if we can increase the ratio, our usage of retreaded tires. So in 2018, they bought 12,000 new tires, and they retreaded almost 27,000 of them. So that's a retread to new ratio of 2.2 to 1. The following year, they bought 9,000 new tires and retreaded 34,000 of them. So that upped the retread ratio to 3.8 to 1 tire. What impact did that have? For this one fleet, they saved $4.2 million, and that's just cost savings alone. But this fleet was also interested in the environmental impact of retreading as well. So this retreader tracked for them the environmental savings. So 1.5 million kilograms of CO2 saved, 237,000 gallons of oil, and 18,000 tires that they kept out of landfill. So it's not only the cost savings of retreading, but it's also the environmental impact of that. And both of those were incredibly important to this fleet. So one of the things that I find most frustrating in dealing with those misconceptions is all of the studies that have looked at retreading in the US, whether it's the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration, Arizona Department of Transportation, Virginia Department of Transportation. There have been study after study after study looking at the safety and reliability of retreading, and they've all determined that retreaded tires are just as safe as new tires. And all of those studies have actually, at the end of it, they recommended that the states or the federal government increase their use of retreaded tires because of the cost savings and the environmental savings without any sort of safety and reliability issues. And you know, when I have conversations with people about where retreads are used, this is one of the surprising facts that they are not aware of. Millions of school buses in the US every year are driving kids to and from school on retreaded tires. If there was an issue with safety or reliability, of course, we would not be transporting our children on retreaded tires. Fire trucks, ambulances, all use retreaded tires. You know, when we had the horrible 9/11 tragedy in New York, those New York Fire Department trucks that rushed to the scene were driving on Bridgestone Van Dijk retreaded tires. Commercial aircraft. So 80% of the commercial aircraft are taking off and landing on retreaded tires, and those tires are retreaded up to 11 times, sometimes more. And then, of course, the other areas that we know about, the waste business, enthusiast off-road, and obviously the huge OTR and mining industries as well, big users of retreaded tires. So, you know, as Michael said earlier this morning, retreading is the original green industry. So from the conception of the tire itself to end of life, we are the greenest of green. So a quality new tire, a quality premium new tire, is specifically designed to be retreaded. So if you're not retreading that tire, you're giving up a lot of that value, and 70% of the value is in the casing itself. Many of our retread plants that operate in the US are also incredibly green in terms of their operation. They use solar power, they collect rainwater, of course, all of the rubber buffings that come off of the tires that come into the plant get collected and recycled and turned into other things. The wood, cardboard, every single thing that comes into a retread plant gets recycled and reused somehow in the system. And you know, all of those natural and synthetic materials and inputs that go into retreading, there's significant savings compared to the manufacture of a new tire. And then obviously reduce carbon emissions, and and also very importantly, landfill avoidance. So instead of burying those tires, you can put them through multiple reuse of life and then ultimately responsibly recycle them. So this is just a graphic of the impact that retreading had in the US last year. So our industry saved 343 million gallons of oil. We kept 663 million pounds of tires out of landfill, and we generated enough energy to power over 1 million homes for a year. So, you know, if you're using 16 million retreads, you can have massive impacts on the environmental outputs. So with our website relaunch, we've also included a sustainability calculator. So you can come to our website and say, and you know, this is based on an average commercial truck tire size, input the number of retreads you've used in the last year or bought, and it will give you an output of how many gallons of oil you saved, how much waste you've diverted, and then also energy savings that you've diverted as well. And there are other examples of this. So I'm going to jump over to one of our friends in the UK. Vaculug is a very sustainably focused, oriented retreader based in the UK, and they have what they call their Karma carbon calculator. So the same idea, you put in the tire size that you're using, how many you're buying, and it will give you an output of your carbon emission savings and allow you to download a report that you can share within your company or with your customers. A good example with another one of our members based in Canada, Tyre, a big truck retreader and also OTR retreader. They have a maple program where they have had all their plants certified and the environmental savings that they generate. And then for each of their customers, they will give them a year-end report that talks about the number of tires they've purchased and then their environmental savings that come from that. And then this is just the last example in the US. So Pomps Tyre is one of the biggest retreaders and retailers in the US. And this is just an example from their company of the same carbon emission savings that they've generated. And I think, sustainability is also becoming increasingly important for those fleets. So these are just a couple of quotes from customers, fleet customers that use retreading in their operation. So, as a business, we strive to operate in a socially responsible way, and we're happy that we can support the recycling process by choosing retreaded tires. So increasingly, it's becoming important for fleets to work with their tire partners and say, how can we save money, still drive performance, but also meet our own sustainability and environmental targets? And as an organization, we, trying to meet the needs of our customers and fleets, are becoming increasingly focused on environmental benefits. So we've produced videos on the environmental benefits of retreading. Every year at Earth Day, we celebrate Earth Day and the impact that the retread industry has on environmental benefits. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we see the future of retreading, at least from a US perspective. So obviously there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, and this is not something that's live today, but the chirography machines that are used to inspect casings to make sure that they're good quality casings that can go through the retread process, it's basically like a giant X-ray. Well, one of the great ways that AI is being used in cancer detection is it's learning all the things where you're able to detect cancer in a human, and it actually does a better job than human doctors at determining if there is cancer, and it also has less false positives. So it's a better judge, in at least initial trials, of determining cancer. So why wouldn't we use that in retreading? So if this is basically just a learning model where you feed all these information into an AI model, and then it automatically, when the tires go through this chirography process, it can identify if there's any issues. So I think that's something that we will see relatively soon in the retread industry in the US, and it's important because it increases the quality, always, of retreading. An interesting thing that Bridgestone Bandag just did in the US, so they have created a Bandag virtual plant tour. So you can go, I don't know if it's live on their website right now, but you can, in addition to seeing a video of the process, you can walk through and control the retreading process through Bandag's virtual plant. So again, just helping customers understand the process, and I think what we see is when people see the retreading process and go through a plant, they are convinced about the benefits of retreading and the quality of it as well. So if they can show more people what it looks like when you retread a tire, it only helps them in terms of future customers. I talked about inspection technology with the chirography machine. It's a huge component of what we do in the US to make sure that quality tires go through the retreading process, which means only quality tires come out of the retreading process. It's not something we talk a lot about, but there is what we call the adjustment rate. in the US. So it's the percentage of tires that fail in operation. And new tires fail, and retread tires do fail as well. Now, but the adjustment rate for retreading is actually lower than new tires. So, anybody that has a concern about running retreaded tires, it's a misplaced concern because the data, again, doesn't back it up in terms of the performance, safety, and reliability. And a lot of it has to do with the inspection process that we put retreaded truck tires through. The other big component that's coming in the retread industry is automation and robotics. So if you're having trouble finding staff to work in the plant, well, you can reduce your reliance on employees by increasingly automate the process, providing robotics, and then also you're increasing the quality because there's consistency and you're not worried about any sort of human intervention in the process itself. This is one of the new products that are coming out. It's a buffing machine that Bandag is starting to use in the US. And then there's examples of robotic builder islands. So again, taking people out of the process where it's a completely automated and robotic building process within the retread plant. Some of the other future developments in tires, and especially retreading in the US, are airless tires. And we have, there are retreaders in the US today that are retreading these, the one on the right is a Michelin Tweel, it's called. It's primarily being used, and this is an example with the green on the left, in agriculture and lawnmower applications. But those tires are easily retreaded. And again, what can damage a tire, or why does a tire often fail? Because it loses air, and then the belts within that tire start to flex, and ultimately the tire can fail. If you can take the air out of the tire, you potentially eliminate some of the reasons for failure. And the next phase is, well, how do we retread that tire so that we continue its useful life for multiple times? So a lot of these things I've talked about, the inspection technology. I think the other big thing that's happening to change all of the tire industry is the collection of data and the usage of data. And that is same for the retread industry. If you're going to have RFID attached to a tire, and it will follow it from its new life to its first retread, its second retread, third retread, and you can see, and the fleets can see how their drivers are using their tires. Is there something that a particular driver is doing differently that's damaging the tires? And it's about capturing all of that data and then being intelligent in how we use that data to increase the performance of the tires. I talked about the airless tires. There's continual development in casings. And that's the unique thing, again, about the US market, because you have those new tire manufacturers and retreaders all within the same company. And so any new technology that comes through the new tire side of the business, it will often get transferred directly over to the retread side of the business. So whether it's rubber compounds, tread designs, if they find something that works for them and it works for their customers, that often immediately gets transferred to the retread side of the business as well. And then we are increasingly looking at using recycled rubber and putting that back into the retreading process. So is there a way we can take those tires that have been retreaded and recycled and ultimately add them back into the retreading process? And then I think the last point is it's another potential growth area for the US is electric vehicles. Now, those vehicles are incredibly heavy, and they have a very high torque rate, higher than internal combustion engine vehicles. Both of those things lead to heavier tire wear, which creates opportunities for the retread industry to start to retread tires specifically for those vehicles as well. So hopefully I've covered for you what we see as an organization as all of the benefits of retreading and what's happening in the US. I think we have a really good story about retreading and where we're going and what we're doing. I think one of the unique things about the retread industry as well, oftentimes when you're investing in environmental technology, that means you have to make it costs you more, right? So if you want to use solar power on your homes, you have to install solar panels, and maybe there's a really long payback time. Or if you want to buy an electric vehicle, right now it's a lot more expensive than an internal combustion vehicle. If you buy retreads, you get all those environmental savings, but it also costs you less money. So you're saving on your costs, and you're saving the environment as well. And just simply keeping those millions of tires out of landfill is a huge benefit of retreading itself. So that's it for me. We, if you want, we have tons of educational videos on our website. There's a lot of information about recommended best practices for retreading. And please take a look at retread.org. And of course, our contact information is on there. If you have any questions about the retread industry or what's happening in the US, please get in touch with us. We'd be happy to help out. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Very comprehensive presentation as always. I think one of the most interesting things, we were talking about it before, that you said that the retread market in the US has been pretty buoyant over the last year or so. Not so in other parts of the world, as I'm sure you realise. Europe is struggling at the moment, as you'll hear later, and the Asian market is also struggling as well. Why do you think the reasons are for that? I mean, the challenges are basically fairly similar. The arguments for sustainability are the same the world over. The cost benefit argument's the same. So why is the US doing particularly well at the moment?
Yeah, I think we have a long history of it. So there's, many fleets have gotten used to using them, but also there's that connection between those major new tire manufacturers and their retread arm. Right. So I think many, and retreaders themselves would say this, we used to sell, and we would sell a retread on price. But now when they go into a customer, they sell an entire suite of services. And that includes their new tire, that includes their retread, that includes the data that goes along with it to help the fleet make good decisions. That includes service and repair. And so they're selling an entire product life cycle to fleets, and it's within that ecosystem of Bridgestone, Goodyear, Michelin, Continental, et cetera. So I think that's helpful.
Okay, we also heard about the unique nature of the US market, and that it's dominated by the three large tyre manufacturers. It's different in other parts of the world. You get a lot of independent retreaders, especially in developing markets. Well, how do you see the future of the US retreading industry in that regard? Because it's been like that for a number of years. Is there any hope for some of the independent suppliers to penetrate the US market, do you think, or are the tyre manufacturers too strong?
Yeah, sorry. It's definitely tough. I mean, we do have people reach out to us that are looking at coming into the US market and investing and trying to be an independent retreader. It takes a lot of capital investment. It takes a lot of human capital as well, and education. I mean, the big retreaders in the US continue to get bigger, and those smaller companies continue to struggle. Now, there are strong independent retreaders that have found a particular segment that they can serve very well. This is sort of an odd example, but there is a retreader based in North Carolina, and they retread race tires for small racetracks around the US. Now, you would think that it's an incredibly small market, but this company makes a great living at retreading those tires. And I think there are other examples of independent retreaders that can find a niche that they can serve, and they can be successful. They're not going to grow into a 10-location, multi-million-dollar operation, but they can still serve those customers and be really, really successful in their market.
Okay, so does anybody in the room have a question for David, please? Thank you. I'll just come down into the audience.
Hello. I have one question that after, like in 2022, the retread versus the new tire ratio, this is getting disturbed. So what is the reason that the retreading is more like a saturation while the overall tire market is increasing? So,
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with imported tires and low cost imported tires. So that's sort of the battle that we have is sort of meeting the needs of those customers who are potentially choosing a low cost, low quality tire, which is a one-time use, versus the retreading a quality tire multiple times. But the fluctuations and what's happened is the protections in the U.S. market with anti-dumping duties and tariffs brought them closer together, and then also some of the supply chain issues that we had during COVID and also impacted those rates as well. So I think the retread industry we've grown a little bit and we've sort of reached a steady state with our current customers. Obviously, we would like to grow that more, but there's always that challenge of facing low-cost competition.
but in the future, like if this curve is going to come on for that low cost import as well as the quality and the labeling and everything is in place. So in the future, is this ratio going to be improved or it is going to be just like that?
I don't know. I mean, the optimistic part of me says that we can improve that ratio. And I think as the quality of all tires, hopefully, improves, that you will increase retreadability even in some of those imported tires that are coming into the US. And we've seen that. So, if you go back 5 years, retreaders would say, look, we're not going to retread any of these Asian tires. And they've continued to test, and they found that, they're good quality, and so now they can. And so as the quality of new tires increases, not just in those brands that I talked about before, but in all those other brands, then you're able to increase retreading. And so my wish is that the new tires that are sold are of a good enough quality to be retreaded, and so that we have a great supply of casings and we can meet the needs of customers through a solid new tire program and a solid retread program.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have a question from Michael Hutt over here, so I'm just going to wander around here so don't walk in front of the microphone of the camera.
Thanks, David. This is a bit of a hypothetical question. If the market wasn't dominated by manufacturers, if it was independent, do you think it would be doing as well now than it currently is?
Honestly, no, I don't think so. It's so much a challenge. And if these new tire companies are selling to massive fleets. And so, some of the names like FedEx, UPS, names that other massive trucking companies in the US that you wouldn't recognize their names, but they're multi-billion-dollar organizations. And so they have a built-in benefit of being able to sell to a massive fleet and providing nationwide coverage. And so I think if that was all down to like independent retreaders, it would be more of a struggle. There is a few retreaders independently that have banded together, and what they've created something called the American Commercial Tire Network, or ACTN. And what that does is if you're a member that's based in South Carolina on the east coast of the US, and you buy your retreads from Snyder Tire, which is based in South Carolina, but your trucking fleet drives all the way to California, and you have an issue in California, you can get a tire from Pomps, which is Parkhouse, which is a Californian retreader, but they're a part of that ACTN network. So they get the same pricing, the same product, the same service, and those guys are able to band together. So I think we would probably have seen more of that as opposed to this sort of massive new tire manufacturers that also have retreading operations. But yeah, it's definitely more of a challenge.
Are there any more questions from... Okay, I'll come round here.
So the saturation point of 16 million is because of the capacity issue in the retreading part, or the...
No, I don't think we don't. I don't think there is some additional capacity that exists in the U.S. and there is additional capacity that's being added. It has more to do with the freight fluctuations and demand, and also the availability of alternatives on the new tire side. So, and retreading is also a very counter-cyclical business. So if the economy is down, retreading goes up because people are they're looking harder at their finances, saying, how can I save money? And so they start to take another look at retreading. So that's some of the other, the supply and demand issue that we face. But no, there's a massive truck stop company in the US called Love's Truck Stops. And they have invested massively in retreading. So they built some of the biggest retread plants in the U.S. because they've sort of vertically integrated. And when the trucks come into their truck stop, they want to measure their tires, do service, give them replacement new tires, and also offer them replacement retreaded tires. And so they're one of the companies that's building more and more capacity within the U.S. so that they're producing, 4 and 5 figure of retreads per day in their plants that are operated out throughout the U.S.
One more.
Okay, so we've got time for one more question, I think. Is there anybody who'd like to ask it?
So,
Someone over there.
is there any anti-dumping duty available in US market for the retread price as well?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Anti-dumping duty is there for the retread materials?
Not for the materials themselves, no. It's just for the tires right now, specifically the finished product that's coming in. There is some federal excise tax benefits for retreaded material that comes into the U.S., so it's less expensive for retreaders to buy because they don't have to pay that federal excise tax. So there is some benefits for materials that are coming into the U.S.
So is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question before we move on? Okay.
Thank you. Congratulations, David, for your presentation. I ask for you about the cost. You told about how is the challenge to show a fleet the services, not just the retread service. In your opinion, what's the challenge in the future to show and to offer for a fleet between, example, the mileage of the retread versus like a low-cost new tire? There is how to show for a fleet, because the fleet buy a service, buy a different cost. How is, in your opinion, the challenging in the future to show? Because every time the people come to the fleet and they offer a low-cost new tire. How to, in your opinion, to show?
Yeah, I think a lot of our retreaders are very good at convincing customers to test with them. So, maybe they're using all new tires and they say, okay, great, look, we've got a product for you. Why don't you put it on 1 truck, 10 trucks, and just try it and see what you think. And let's measure it and see how it performs. And, the retreaders themselves are very confident in their performance, and it ends up getting proven. And so often, if they can at least convince them to try it, they will often get a new customer from that. And I think that, the numbers don't lie. So if you can, in that chart I showed you where that one company saved $4 million without having any performance issues, they have those figures that they can share with the fleet, but then they have to convince the fleet itself to try it, test it. And they often start with, 1 truck and then slowly build up from there. And like I said, bringing customers through a retread plant so they can see the operation is a great way to convince them to potentially try it, because they see the quality process that goes in. And then the next step is let's put some on a truck and see how it performs.